So in today's video, we got Zohran Mamdani, who continues to give New Yorkers an even more grim outlook as he doubles down on his socialist agenda after announcing a new tax as residents continue to flee the city. And so we got a lot to get into. Don't forget, if you enjoy the content, smash that thumbs up button. That's the best way you can let me know. Subscribe to stay locked in with future videos. Let's start with Mamdani announcing his new tax that he's so excited about. He wishes everyone a happy tax day. Take a listen.
When I ran for mayor, I said I was going to tax the rich. Well, today, we're taxing the rich. I'm thrilled to announce we've secured a pied-à-terre tax, the first in New York's history. This is an annual fee on luxury properties worth more than $5 million, whose owners do not live full-time in the city. Like for this penthouse, which hedge fund CEO Ken Griffin bought for $238 million. This pied-à-terre tax is specifically designed for the richest of the rich, those who store their wealth in New York City real estate, but who don't actually live here. But even so, they're able to reap the huge financial rewards of owning property in, dare I say, the greatest city in the world. And most of the time, these units are sitting empty, since again, they don't actually live here. This is a fundamentally unfair system that hurts working New Yorkers. Now, it's coming to an end. This tax will raise at least $500 million directly for the city. It'll help fund things like free childcare, cleaner streets, and safer neighborhoods. As mayor, I believe everyone has a role to play in contributing to our city, and some a little bit more than others. Happy Tax Day, New York.
And so we got Zohran Mamdani here. He's wishing everybody a happy tax day because apparently this has become the new Democrat platform where now it's okay. Taxing is good. Taxing is no longer such a nasty word as long as you're taxing the right people. And according to the left, taxing the right people means taxing those who they believe have more than enough to pass around to everybody else for these government programs that, mind you, only and always get more and more expensive with each and every passing year that they implement. You don't see these government programs in these liberal cities becoming less expensive. They only become more expensive, which means that then they're going to require more taxes, which means eventually at some point they're either going to run out of money to take from those who they deem as having more than enough to take. And then at that point, we know how the hustle goes. They got to find a new mark. And I'm sure at that point, they'll redefine what rich is and start coming after those who maybe perhaps thought they were excluded from these sort of taxes. But the premise of Mamdani's new tax is to tax the secondary homes of wealthy New Yorkers who don't actually live at these homes, but because they own them, they are actually contributing a great amount to the city: property tax, maintenance, upkeep, utilities, when you talk about gas, electric, water, that to maintain the property. But they don't use any resources because, well, they don't live in New York City. And somehow Mamdani came up with the bright idea to say, hey, we should take more from those people who are putting in more than their fair share in this instance and really not taking much. But yeah, we should still take more. And obviously there are a bunch of people who think that might not be a smart idea. And so let's jump into this next clip. You got Kevin O'Leary on CNN breaking down why this is not really the best idea when you think about it long term as far as the damage that it can do. But nonetheless, Mamdani believes that this is the route he wants to go. But let's take a listen.
You replied to Mamdani's video on X calling this, quote, the best commercial I've ever seen for Miami Beach real estate. You sure?
Yeah, it is. I think what happens here, and it's been going on for a few years in states like New York, Massachusetts, New Jersey, is when you tax people past 50%, pretty well in any tax bracket, as they move towards retirement into their 50s and 60s, they ask themselves, what's the reason that I would stay here when I can go to Tennessee, Texas, Florida? And that's what's been happening. There's lots of data that shows that. But this particular tax on the pied-à-terre, a place you stay when you're in New York instead of a hotel, is interesting. Let's ask ourselves, without the rhetoric and the politics, does this make sense? So you've got someone who spends $5 million or more, does not really use the place, but still pays maintenance, so supporting employees in the building, and property tax, but doesn't put any burden on the city's services whatsoever. How stupid a tax is this? Because you would want more people doing this, investing their capital in New York, not using any of the services of the city whatsoever, paying property tax all day long, even though they don't live there, paying for maintenance in the building. This is the stupidest policy I have ever seen in real estate.
Yeah, so you just heard that. And what Kevin O'Leary explains right there is pretty basic as far as the long-term effects that a tax like that can have on a city. While sure, maybe in the short term, you get some revenue to be able to pay for your socialist agenda, but long-term, as these people are getting older, as these people are reevaluating their portfolios and starting to decide what is worth keeping, what is worth selling. And so you got all of this happening while people are deciding to flee blue cities and blue states in favor of more affordable areas. And so let's jump into this next clip. Take a listen.
Record numbers of folks who are living in the big cities moving out, going to smaller cities, going to states with a far better tax system because they see where the path is headed. They know it's getting more expensive to live in their states or their cities, and they're taking off. So I got an idea for us. We should become entrepreneurs together.
And forgive me, did you include Washington State in that?
That's another big one.
Yeah. I mean, those taxes that they want, that 9.9%, sounds a lot like Mamdani's 9.9% that didn't fly temporarily here in the city. We'll see what happens forward in New York, but they're really trying to get that through in Washington State. That's not good news in terms of income for high earners, business owners, the people who hire other people.
Yeah, and so Mamdani believing that taxing the rich is this painless thing that he should be able to do sounds good, but he's also taxing the base that is the most mobile, the group that creates the most jobs, and those who pay the most attention to this sort of thing because they understand how much it affects their bottom line when it comes to earnings and revenue and ability to continue to grow and expand. But that doesn't stop Mamdani from doubling down after he was asked how it was going after his first 100 days, coming up against the wall, which is the deficit, the city deficit, which is a real thing that you have to contend with and balance the budget. Mamdani doesn't shy away. He doubles down on the belief in his socialist agenda. Take a listen.
Now that you've bumped up against the hard realities of a $5.4 billion budget shortfall and the other red tape that you have to go through, do you still believe in democratic socialism? Do you still think it can be effective?
I believe in it even more than I did the day before, and that's because of the fact that it is focused on the needs of working people, and working people need that focus, that fight from politicians more than ever.
And you still don't, you have agreement with Governor Hochul on that. You don't have an agreement with Governor Hochul on raising taxes on the wealthy yet. Will you be able to deliver on your promise of taxing the wealthy to help pay for your programs?
Absolutely, and I'm actually happy to tell you that that pied-à-terre tax, that is an agreement that we have to tax the wealthy. Because again, when we're talking about a pied-à-terre, this is a home that is owned here in New York City by someone who doesn't live in New York City. And we're talking about the valuation of which is the super rich, not just of this country, but across the world. I was just yesterday standing in front of 220 Central Park West, and there at the penthouse was a home that Ken Griffin had bought for $238 million. This is the kind of real estate activity that's happening in the city, homes that are largely empty for much of the year, but it all occurs while New Yorkers are hurting in this same city. We're starting to actually bridge that gap, and I'm so excited to be working with the governor on it.
The question that you have to ask with this is, where does it stop? Because if you can start in a place where you feel like you should be able to tax and take from those just based off the simple idea of they have more than enough to take, then where does that stop? Because the programs only get bigger, only more expensive. The budget only keeps on expanding with these government programs in these blue cities. And so where does it stop? While Mamdani may be able to get away with this with the New Yorkers who are already there and feel some maybe attachment to New York and decide to stay despite the increase in the taxes, it's not just about that, but also what does that do to future buyers, future people who want to move to New York, and maybe perhaps they're weighing the risk versus the reward, the liability versus an asset, and changing their perception based on these type of policies on how they view an opportunity to live in New York City versus going to another more favorable state. But here's where Mamdani stumbles after being asked about are property taxes that would affect the middle class that he threatened earlier on this year to impose if he could not get his tax the rich policy through the governor. Is that off the table? And well, here's how Mamdani responded. Take a listen.
Why did you float raising property taxes, which typically fall heavily on the middle class as well?
So in New York City, as you said earlier, we have a legal obligation to balance the budget. We have 3 moments where we come forward with the budget: preliminary budget, an executive budget, and then the adopted budget, the final one. In the preliminary budget on February 17th, we had to both tell New Yorkers about not just the level of our fiscal deficit, but what was still left to fill, $5.4 billion, as you said. Now, I can't put forward an accounting statement and just say $5.4 billion, we hope to find a way working with the state. That's the truth. But in terms of what you have to put in your budget, you have to use the tools the city has to fill it in the interim. And so in the interim, what we did was the only tools we had at our disposal: a property tax and rating of our reserves. But I made very clear on that day and every day since, it is a last resort, because what we want to pursue, what we will spend every day looking to pursue, is working with Albany, working with the governor, legislative leaders. And frankly, we're already seeing the fruits of that work. This pied-à-terre tax is one example of how we're reducing that deficit and not doing so on the backs of working class New Yorkers.
You're calling a property tax a last resort. Are you backing away from it? Have you all but abandoned your push for a property tax because there was backlash?
No, I'm just quoting myself from February 17th. The very day that I introduced our preliminary budget, I said then and there, I do not want to do this. And the truth of it is because it's a broken system. It is a system far more regressive than what we want to do, which is progressive taxation.
So a property tax, increasing property taxes, is still on the table.
We are continuing to work with Albany to ensure that that is not the path that we go down. We're seeing in the pied-à-terre tax, we're already finding notes of encouragement that show us a different kind of path.
Yeah, and so basically what you just heard right there was Mamdani letting it be known that it's not off the table. It's not. Which brings me back to what I was mentioning earlier in this video, full circle, which is, where does it stop? Where does it stop? When the well runs dry, when you need a new mark, when you no longer can take from those who you deem you can take from, who becomes the new target? And that's what New Yorkers are going to find out. Yeah, so you have Mamdani, who he is going all in on this tax-the-rich socialist agenda. And I get it. It's very easy to not really care, to really sit here and say like, well, you know, it's the rich. They have more than enough to pass around and to give out. They'll be okay. Who cares? It's the corporations. It's these people. But let me tell you something. That's a very dangerous game to play. Very dangerous, because listen, I'll tell you, when you're not making money, it's easy to sit here and then pocket watch other people who are making plenty of money. But the thing is, what happens when you become the person who's making more? What happens when you start to find the success? You start to realize, and it doesn't even have to be millions. The just thing is, what happens when you find success more than what you have, and then the government comes along and just says, hey, well, you know what, since you're more successful now than what you were before, we want to take a little bit more off the top, you know, for the little guy who ain't got nothing, who didn't put in the time and the work and the effort that you did, but we want to make sure they're okay. Yeah, I mean, sounds good when you're on the other side of the fence, but not so much when you're the one who's going through it. And I think that's the dangerous game that Mamdani, that people who are buying into this, they're playing. And eventually, as always, because it's about the group, it's about the collective, because it's about individuals not having more than what is deemed too much, well, then that only means that they can broaden exactly what that definition of too much is, and who does not fall within that range. And that's when it becomes extremely, extremely dangerous. And so we'll have to see. But I want to get into this last clip, the utopia that lie. Here's the truth. Check it out.
I grew up in a progressive paradise. The gap between the haves and the have-nots was practically non-existent. The literacy rate was almost 100%. Healthcare was universal and free. No one fought over race, religion, or class. Maternity leave was generous. Childcare was free. There were no limits on abortion. So where was this paradise? No, it wasn't Norway, Sweden, or Finland. It was the Soviet Union. Everything I just described was true, and yet life in the USSR, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, was a living hell. Yes, income inequality barely existed, but that was because everyone was equally poor. Appliances, consumer products, and fresh food were scarce. If you wanted a car, good luck. You'd be on a waiting list for 10 years. Yes, women were emancipated, but they spent most of their time waiting in line for hours for food to feed their children. Disposable diapers were unheard of. as were vacuum cleaners. A dishwasher? Are you kidding? Healthcare was free, in theory, but you could only get decent and timely treatment if you had influence, connections, and cash to pay the bribes. Everyone was educated, but there were strings attached. If you went to college, the government decided what your career would be and where you'd live. Racial and ethnic strife was limited, yes, but only because the government ruled by fear and terror, imprisoning millions of people, so-called enemies of the state, in a vast network of concentration camps known as gulags. These enemies included my great-grandparents, who met in one of these gulags. Every morning, guards would randomly select 3 prisoners and throw them into the icy waters of a nearby lake to drown in front of the whole camp. New York Times reporter Walter Duranty, a Stalin apologist, once wrote, "You can't make an omelette without breaking eggs." But in the Soviet Union, there were no omelettes, only broken lives, broken dreams, broken bodies. It may be hard to believe this now, but for most of its existence, the Soviet Union was the envy of many progressives, academics, and celebrities. America should be more like communist Russia, they said. More equal, more equitable, more emancipated. This view was born of sheer ignorance. The USSR had no virtues worth emulating. When gullible Westerners visited, they saw what the regime wanted them to see. Literally, movie sets of a worker's paradise. There was even a phrase for it, a Potemkin village. And there was also a phrase for the Westerners who were fooled by this facade, useful idiots. Of course, no one in the Soviet Union was fooled. They weren't living the dream, they were living the nightmare. Having been raised in that worker's paradise, I am sensitive to any promises of utopia. When I hear progressives talking about eradicating inequality, smashing the patriarchy, and righting the wrongs of settler colonialism, all echoes from the Soviet era, my blood runs cold. These promises might sound idealistic, but they're anything but. It seems to be a sad fact of human nature that people who don't realize how good they have it are vulnerable to demagogues who promise to tear it all down and build a better tomorrow. That's exactly what Lenin promised before imposing tyranny, poverty, and terror. Exactly what Mao promised before imposing tyranny, poverty, and terror. Exactly what Castro promised before imposing tyranny, poverty, and terror. Think it can't happen in the UK or the US? Well, maybe not. Maybe our institutions are so strong they can fight off any attempts to undermine them. I certainly hope so. Then again, do you think the Russians knew where the Bolsheviks were leading them? Do you think the Cambodians knew where Pol Pot was leading them? Venezuelans where Hugo Chavez was leading them? I'll tell you where, to that better tomorrow. And just in case you think those Russians, Cambodians, and Venezuelans were just naive, the New York Times thought the same thing in each case, that they were headed to a better tomorrow. Yes, in a perfect world, everything would be free and everyone would follow their bliss while riding unicorns to the end of the rainbow.
So is that the new path of the Democrat Party, as we're seeing them become more progressive, more radical? You have the governor in Virginia and in New Jersey, and then you got Mamdani, obviously, as we're talking about in New York City. And so is this the new face of the Democrat Party, and are people going to actually listen and go along with it? And what will it do if it actually ever becomes, to the point where we get a Democrat president who, this is their agenda, that's what they want to do? How will it affect this country? Let me know what you think. Comments down below. As always, I appreciate when you guys chime in. Smash that thumbs up if you are enjoying the content. Subscribe for more. And as always, until next time.